Rohan, it's great to have you on the pod. Welcome to the Latitude podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Brian. I've heard so much about you. This is the first time you're actually speaking. I just want to thank you for picking Hyperplane as a very early investor and all the help that you've given us over the last 2 years.
No, it's a great founding team and exciting space that you're in. And I just found out that we're actually not too far from each other. So you're calling in from Menlo Park today, which is kind of tech capital, venture capital. And so we'll have to catch up in person sometime. Not in this digital world.
Absolutely.
Well, listen, I want to dive in real quick and love to hear you share a little bit more to kind of paint, lay the foundation, if you will, of your previous experiences and your your co-founders as well. And how did that motivate you to create Hyperplane? What are the pains you're looking to solve?
Yeah, I think we spent the last 10 years working at big tech. We learned firsthand what it takes to build an AI layer for personalization, whether it's Instagram or Google or LinkedIn. Each one of these companies, they are built for personalized consumer experiences, right? Whether it's jobs that you're interested in or content you should follow, like personalization is so core to these products that they're built into the products, right? And so I spent 7 years at LinkedIn, touched a lot of LinkedIn's recommender systems. LinkedIn has tons and tons of first party data, and first party data is just data they own. So if you think of all the job postings on LinkedIn, all the LinkedIn profiles, all of this is text data, right? And there are huge teams at LinkedIn that ingest this data, clean it, structure it, and they fill this thing called the LinkedIn economic graph, right? This is what helps LinkedIn figure out what is Brian's title, what are the skills he has, what are companies he's interested in, who are people you should follow, and things like that, right? And LinkedIn's no special in this. Google does the same thing. Google has a lot of first-party data, and my co-founder Daniel, he was on Google Brain for 4 years, where they built these massive models to understand what are a user's interests, what are things they like, and they built personalization into Google's ad targeting platform, right? And so after spending so many years building these personalization engines, when we quit, we were looking at the financial sector, and the problem that stood out to us was any bank in the world, right? They have the exact same interface, whether it's you, me, our parents, or our kids that use banking apps, right? And all of our financial behaviors are different, our needs are different, and there's very little personalization built into the banking experience. So, what does it take to build this personalization layer for banks and for financial institutions, right? So, that was the problem we wanted to solve. The core hypothesis we started with was banks don't use all of the data they have internally today. And they don't use it because tooling is hard and a lot of this data is very dirty, right? So if we are able to ingest and make use of all of the data banks have, what can they build with it? That's the problem we're trying to solve.
I want to double click on that in a little bit. First, I want to just take a step back, and if you could give a little more context on how this operates, because I think everyone here probably on the pod knows a little bit about, obviously machine learning at a high level, AI. These are words that, generative AI is the newer kind of like evolution of AI, but if you think back to like Meta or Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn, Google, there's the graph, like the social graph of Facebook, and that was like the core of Facebook's kind of expansion. When you're looking at this, I remember the growth team, Shamath talking about this in the early days of Facebook, where you're doing these kind of experiments and you figure out, once there's a inflection point when it's like 10 people, and then so as you look at all this data, are you if you're on the engineering team, is it engineering and product closely working together to define like a specific metric, and then you're kind of measuring against that metric? Is it a revenue goal typically? Just to give a little sense on how the larger companies operate, and then we'll go down and drill down into kind of how you anticipate helping banks.
So there are two parts to this question, right? The first part is, how do engineering and product teams think about personalization? And so you're absolutely right. There are business metrics that they care about, the product teams care about. It could be revenue, it could be engagement, it could be the total number of sessions on the platform, it could be total number of new users signed up for. So it really depends on which product you're offering personalization for, right? So for people you may know on LinkedIn, it's the total number of connections made on the platform, right? And the connections made translates to the total number of new sessions because more people come onto the platform. The more sessions you drive, the more advertising revenue you drive, more active users you drive. So a lot of these metrics are related to each other, right? And so every time you roll out a new product, you want to optimize for a single business metric or a few business metrics. Each time you care about a business metric, a personalization model can be trained to improve the decisioning or improve the recommendation to drive that business metric up. Now, since you mentioned generative AI, I want to draw the distinction between generative AI and predictive AI. What we're talking about now is predictive AI because there is a business metric. We want to optimize that metric. And can we train a model to predict that outcome before it happens? And that is predictive AI. Now, the second part of this is these big tech companies outside of the product and engineering teams that are driving personalization, there are horizontal teams. These are teams responsible to make sure all of the data LinkedIn has and all of the data Google has is ingested, cleaned, processed, and ready to consume for machine learning and personalization, right? Because there is a huge gap between what does raw data look like and what does data that's ready for machine learning consumption look like, right? This could involve any kind of enrichment process, cleaning process, all of the LLMs and the generative aspect of AI fits here, right? So if we can understand a user better, understand a job better, understand a post better, and bring all of that data into a structured format for predictive AI applications, that's the gap that exists in the market today.
I have a selfish question now before we get into a little bit more about Hyperplane and kind of the problems you want to solve and what you expect to do, in the next couple of years as you build this business. A selfish question would be, it feels like the algorithm behind LinkedIn in terms of, it's a bit of a conundrum to me in terms of when I actually post, because sometimes I'll get like massive. If you could actually give any advice to anyone listening that's trying to build their brand through LinkedIn and post, I know that's not necessarily maybe the area that you focused on, but you might have a little bit of inside baseball in terms of how that works. Like there's one thesis that I had at one point was like posts and then like, in Slack, I just share that with a bunch of people and like, hey, can you upvote this and comment on it really quick? So there's like a bunch of a flurry of activity, which then may trigger something in the algorithm that says, oh, this is worth noting. What are if you could share, because I know in the audience there's probably people listening that post on LinkedIn and they're looking to kind of maximize that. I know that's probably not your specific area of expertise, but if you could share a little bit of the algo there to what you know.
Yeah, I mean, this is not something LinkedIn does, but because I didn't work on it.
Yeah.
And so, but I can definitely tell you intuitively some things that can be useful, right? Which is there are a bunch of metrics LinkedIn cares about, right? It is virality, it is the number of people that like your post, number of people that share your post, but also there is implicitly an importance of who likes your post, right? As an influencer yourself, you endorsing my post or commenting on my post and acknowledging socially that this is relevant, this is important, is going to do a lot more benefit to my post than someone else in my network, right? So you're absolutely right. It's the exact same thing if you want to post on Hacker News and get this up. Can you get important people that are important from a domain perspective? Like if you're posting about finance, there'll be some people that are important. If you're posting about media, there'll be other people that are important. So getting the right people to endorse you and doing that to trigger the network effects definitely makes a huge difference.
Okay, cool. Now that we got that out of the way, and maybe as those as people are thinking through their strategies there, they can kind of give that some additional thought. But I want to dig in because you guys, you started this company a couple of years ago, and then you operate in stealth mode, which is not the typical thing for most startups. Most startups, the advice is like launch and then roll it out fast, get customer feedback. What is the thought process around kind of building for a couple of years, how did you go about it, and what's the last couple of years been like for you as you kind of come out and go to market with stuff?
The last 2 years have been super exciting. If you think back to the time when we first started the company, right, we were outsiders to the financial industry. None of us had worked at a bank, and none of us had even any idea what kinds of data are available inside the bank, right? And we didn't want to be yet another company on the AI hype bandwagon, right? We knew that when we started, we could definitely build an AI consultancy out of this because we could just go to the bank and say, hey, we have tons and tons of experience building sophisticated personalization models. You have data that's unused. So let's work together on a personalization solution. But we didn't want to do that, right? We wanted to build a data platform. We wanted to build something that's repeatable and scalable. And we wanted to understand firsthand what is the business impact of investing in AI, right? And so to do this, we wanted to bring in design partners, understand, build these models from scratch, launch them online, run A/B tests, get real traction and real results of business impact delivered to our customers. And then once we are able to package this coherently as what are the business areas within the bank that will most benefit from AI? What are the sources of data that are rich and dirty, right? Rich because if you invest enough AI into this source of data, you're able to figure out a lot of user behavior from it, but dirty enough that simple techniques are not going to be useful to try. And so we wanted to learn a lot of these things and then go to market in a much bigger market, right? So along the way, there were a few things that we figured out. A lot of the large banks have AI investments, and the long tail of banks, they are resource constrained that they can't really invest significant efforts in AI. But the large banks, most of their AI efforts are siloed. What this means is there might be one or two business areas that invest in AI, but if they do the hard work of processing a new source of data and able to extract insights out of this, other verticals are not able to leverage that. And primarily, this is because there is a lack of centralization in intelligence efforts. There's a lack of tooling, there's a lack of standardization in the process of bringing in more data into AI models. And so that was the gap that we identified over the last 2 years. And that's the gap we are looking to fulfill by building that data intelligence layer for banks.
When I was with a investor who happened to be from the Valley, he was at a conference in Lima, Peru recently. And he was like, he didn't really know much about Nubank, surprisingly, because he just wasn't exposed to Latin America. And he's like, what's so great about them? And, I tried to explain a little bit more about, the market and, how it's, dominated by a couple different banks and there's very low NPS. But what in summarizing, I said, if you look at Nubank and you compare it with a regular bank, Nubank is a technology company first and a bank second. And that just kind of small statement really exemplifies the reality is you've got a bunch of these old school businesses that have been around for a long time. They're really good businesses. They're super profitable, but they didn't build in mind, with the reality of 2023, 24 on, data across different organizations, being able to share that information and make sense of it. So what is your biggest challenge as you go into these companies that have like a ton of data, but they don't really know how to kind of, make sense of it all. And, what's your biggest challenge as you go into working with these banks, getting them to kind of leverage what you're building? And then maybe you could also explain in really practical terms, like an example of like a specific problem that you're solving.
Yeah, I think this is yet another thing that like every B2B startup is told, sell to other startups, sell to startups slightly bigger than you because they're going to be able to iterate fast. You're going to get product feedback quickly. You can refine the product and then you can find product market fit. But that's not something we did, right? We went after some of the largest enterprises because of precisely what you mentioned. They have the data moat. And so even small improvements that you can make on top of their data is going to have a huge revenue impact. And so today, we have 12 of the largest banks in Brazil as our customers. And to give you a sense of scale, these banks collectively bank about 30% of the population, right? So the biggest challenge for us has been As a startup our size, how do we break through the walls of bureaucracy? Because some of these large banks have extremely long sales cycles. A lot of committees need to approve you as a vendor. There are tons of other bottlenecks before you even get in the door, right? So, how do you short circuit that and reduce the time to show them value? That's been the single biggest challenge so far, right? And along the way, what's helped us is we've been able to find these thought leaders, these innovators, the early adopters within these companies, building relationships with them and allowing them to operate like a startup inside the walls of larger institutions has really been helpful. We've been able to help them iterate quickly. They are super respectful and give us feedback on different verticals where they think we can be helpful. Almost all of our customers we've been able to land and expand. What that means is we start with one vertical or business area within the bank. They see benefits and they end up recommending us to sister teams. So that part has been super nice to see. Um, Today, after all of that experience, we've been able to productize the platform and identify like business areas we can serve within the bank, data sets that we know we can add value on, and build out this robust infrastructure layer to help scale AI within the banks. Right now, you asked the question of what is one product area or business area uh, you can see these banks use. And so the pull we have been having is from the marketing team, right? Most banks are turning into multi-product platforms. They have 50 to 100 products. They have millions of customers. And today there's a lack of personalization on which product are we going to show which user through which channel at what time, right? And so here we've had customers where we've been able to go from no personalization in marketing to being able to ramp 88 models in a week, right? We've been able to drive their sales by 3x over what they were able to do before. And this is because we were able to figure out from the data what users' financial behaviors are, what are their financial needs, what is the gap that they are currently facing with the product suite, and then recommending the right product to them through channels that they are more likely to engage, right? So this is just one result on the marketing side.
What you mentioned that we have the skills and the capacity to start a consulting company. In enterprise sales, one of the things that is an approach is that you actually do a scope project for consulting, so you get paid while you do customer development. Why not go to market with something like that rather than spend so much time to build something that you're trying to figure out? Was that ever discussed? And what is your thought of that strategy? Because then you get paid to learn about your customer, and you also identify what the needs are, which are likely the same needs as other customers. What's your take on that?
We did spend a lot of time brainstorming about this question, right? So getting paid to do the discovery was something that we wanted to do because we wanted to differentiate between what is a nice to have and what is a must have for these banks. Now, the good thing for us is almost all of the banks we spoke to in Brazil were sophisticated enough to have the technology adoption required to kickstart AI investments, which means they had data on the cloud, they had some kind of an enterprise data warehouse strategy. And so we did get paid during all of our pilots, right? When I said that we wanted to platformize the solution, we didn't want to build a custom solution for one bank that we know is not going to scale to another bank, right? So what we did instead was we identified sources of data that we know exists across all banks. For example, bank transaction data, right? Every consumer bank in the world, whether they offer a checking account, a savings account, a credit card, a debit card, is going to have transactions from those cards and accounts, right? Can we use this data to learn some kind of user behavior to help recommend better products? This is something that if we are able to figure out a recipe once, we can sell this to every single consumer bank in the world. That's what I meant by our focus was on productization from a data perspective and from a from like the kinds of business verticals we will go after.
I think that's a really important point for those listening that are selling into enterprises, particularly in the kind of 0 to 1 phase. Approach things from like a modularized thinking and like a platform where you're solving a really specific problem, but you can't get too trapped into the like deep customization of a solution for one customer. you need to build and make sure that you have applications for other customers. And so I think that's a good lesson there for that you guys, how you approach it. I think that other founders should take heed of that. So let's transition a little bit, and I'd love to. So you started a couple of years ago. You've got 12 customers now. If you think of the go-to-market strategy, and you're working with these customers, these are long sales cycles. It's hard to get people to make decisions and move. There's a phrase that I remember learning the early days with, which is using FUD as a tactic to try to get people to move. FUD is fear, uncertainty, and doubt. The looming threat of a new bank, is that the strongest driver in your mind of getting banks to get on their horse and make moves? What is the largest factor to get businesses and banks to decide and move forward with these things when it's such a kind of a complex sales process in a really, really crazy organizational structure?
That's a really important question for us to answer, right? I think a lot of banks across the world, they care about being your primary financial institution, right? No one, and even as a consumer, I don't want to be carrying 6 different credit cards in my wallet when I go out, right? The only reason I have to do that is because I don't get what I want from my primary financial bank, right? And so every bank is already trying to figure out what is my share of wallet for each customer, what are financial products my customer A wants, and what are the products that I'm delivering today. Should I be thinking of new products, or am I just not positioning the right product in front of the right customer? Everyone is trying to grow their share of wallet. So yes, there is the threat of someone like Nubank, who has a lot more technology investments, a lot more AI investments, a lot more personalization built in compared to any other player. But banks are already thinking about all of the problems we spoke about today. They're already thinking about personalization. They're thinking about digital transformation. And they're thinking about what can we do to increase the share of wallet. So the good thing for us was we didn't have to explain the problem to them, right? And that went a long way in helping them pay for a solution like us, even during the pilot phase, right? Because the minute we told them about what we can do and showed them early results on their data, they were willing to pay for a solution because that was something that they were going to invest in anyway. One thing that helped us make this case better was we were able to reduce the time to value. Like between the time their data hit the Hyperplane platform, in under 2 weeks, we could show them things in their own data that they did not know. Things like 20% of their population was increasing their usage of ride sharing. And this was a quarter right after COVID, right? So the trends that they were seeing in their population and strategic choices that they could be making as a bank, this was in their data, but it hadn't been uncovered unless someone actually used AI on this raw data and figured out what was really in the data, right? So these things went a long way in helping them reduce that extremely long sales cycle.
Rohan, you've been working in the Valley. You've worked at, before LinkedIn, you worked at Microsoft, which obviously became Microsoft, as Microsoft acquired LinkedIn. You were at Microsoft before that, and then you spent over 7 years. So you've been doing machine learning AI stuff for about a decade, which, in technology terms, that's let's call it dog years, right? That's 70 years in the current kind of, development of everything. Silicon Valley based, why Brazil?
I get that question quite often. And especially someone not Brazilian, when we're talking about Brazil as the first market, I always get this look of, what are you doing in Brazil? I actually had very little connection to Latin America before this, but I had one very important connection. The first time I visited LATAM was Colombia, maybe 15 years ago. I used to be a professional speed skater, and I was on the Indian team at the World Championship. And the World Championship just happened to be in Colombia that year. So that was my only relationship with LATAM before Hyperplane. But more why Hyperplane and why Brazil? Brazil is the innovation hub for financial technology, right? But there were a few aspects of Brazil that made it a very attractive first market for us. It has a lot of mature and profitable banks with uh, enough investments in technology that they had data on their cloud. There's a huge focus on digital transformation and making the entire banking experience digital. I think we've got Nubank to thank for a lot of this change. The incumbents are looking to make a lot of their experiences digital. And then there's the open finance movement, right? Two or 3 years ago, the Brazilian central bank uh, pushed for the open finance initiative, because of which a lot of the largest banks in the market are already sharing and receiving data between each other, because the consumers is explicitly sharing consent to this data, right? So banks are getting a lot of this data through open finance, but they don't know how to use it because the data is still too dirty and they don't know what to do with it. So we didn't have to convince them that, hey, you're sitting on a lot of this data. They know that they're getting this data. They just don't know how to use it. So the problem was there, and we didn't have to explain a lot of this thing, right? And so that made Brazil a really attractive first market. Uh, Also, we were very well networked into the Brazilian financial industry. That made it easy for us to reach some of the thought leaders in the financial ecosystem. It was all. I mean, when you start an AI company, you need the first few people to believe that AI is part of the solution to their business problem, and then take a chance on you as someone that can solve that problem, right? So getting in the door, definitely relationships go a long way, and we had that network to make it happen in Brazil.
So, there's if I think back to like my last company, we had a lot of data, right? And we had a lot of property information, we had a lot of consumer data, people searching. There's a lot of kind of like behavioral stuff of what types of properties, pricing information. I always felt like we struggled to really, really take advantage of the information. I think we had some initiatives that were good. What advice do you have for companies that manage large amounts of raw data? And like, is it as simple as like hiring somebody, that's really, really capable and like has been working in machine learning? And how do you, of course, this is a very open-ended question, but like, how do you just extract as much value from data through AI and machine learning to achieve your business objectives? Like, what do you think is the low-hanging fruit, and what are startups missing or companies missing that manage tons of data?
I think the part that often gets overlooked when it comes to companies very successfully investing in AI is the cost that is associated with investing in AI, right? Going from having no or very little AI to building sophisticated personalization at scale requires a lot of technology investment. Investments in talent, investments in infrastructure, and then investments in the AI modeling itself, right? And so what we have built with Hyperplane, every time we bring in a source of data, there are three things we do with it. We ingest, we enrich, and then we embed. What that means is you need to have infrastructure in place to make it easy to onboard new sources of data. Only then are you going to be able to use almost all of the data you own. If it takes you 12 to 18 months to just make your new source of data accessible to the model, then you're not going to be able to use it for AI development. The second is enrich, right? Enrichment is a lot of the times there are public sources of data available, there are data sources across the institution that you should really be combining to make sense and add more metadata and clean up existing sources of data. In the example we were talking about earlier, bank transactions, right? Now, if you have a database of all publicly available merchants, all publicly available employers, can you clean up these transactions to start to make sense out of it? That's the enrichment step. And then finally, embed. We are in a world where every single company is talking about large language models, foundation models, generative AI, but building something task specific or application specific still has a lot of value in terms of generating business impact. Uh, to just ground that discussion further, in the example we are talking about, we're talking about selling to financial institutions. If you want to learn a user's financial behavior, which is if I look at all of your inflows and expenses in the last 3 months, how closely can I predict your inflows and expenses in the next 30 days? Building an off the shelf LLM to solve this problem is not going to get you too far, right? So, a lot of our innovation in the last 2 years has been how do you train a large language model to ingest multiple sources of data, different kinds of data? The real estate example you mentioned, you have property information, you have information about the users, you have information about different geographical regions. Can you train a single model to consume multiple sources of data, but you're learning a very specific user behavior? In our case, we're learning financial spend information. Like, can we model what does a user spend look like in the next 30 days? If we're able to model this well, the features extracted from this model can then benefit every single business area. These are the features that are used to train personalization models across product lines, across business verticals, right? So investing in a core central intelligence piece that can then scale up AI investments across the organization is definitely one piece of advice that I would give. And that is something that's benefited LinkedIn, benefited Google. Instead of working in silos and doing ad hoc experiments of building one-off AI models for one particular product. That simply does not scale if you're going to invest in AI for the next 5 to 10 years.
Interesting timing for you because Brazil was the first market. You explained why, but why is now the best time to expand to the US? And what's the product strategy? How do you adapt to going to the US market? What are the differences and what are the expectations?
So it was only along the last 2 years that we learned that this was largely an unsolved problem, even in the US. It was simply not a problem we were aware of when we started. That said, we feel like now we've reached a level of maturity where the product is repeatable and scalable, which means we have adapters to bring in new sources of data, APIs that power marketing products, APIs that power credit operations. And so what does it look like to go to market in the US? I think there are two parts again. There's a go to market perspective and then the product perspective, right? Now, go to market, it really depends on who is the right customer in the US. Is it a mid-market bank or a credit union or a community bank? Or is it one of the larger banks, right? And the go to market motion is going to be very different depending on which type of bank we go into. And so we don't have the same kind of network that we had in Brazil. So we rely a lot more on partners, investors, friends in our network to help us find those ideal design partners and then help with the product discovery itself. And that brings me to the second part, which is from the product perspective. Even though the models and the AI and all of our investments in research will scale to a second market, what business areas have the highest appetite to invest in personalization in the US? Now, this could look very, very different, right? Because it's unlikely that a bank would want to use AI models for credit approvals in the US. Fraud is a use case that we get a lot of demand for from companies that we speak to, right? So what is the first or the second application that you want to go to market in the US? That is something that we're actively researching. And the second question from a product perspective is, today, because we are working with very sophisticated banks in Brazil, we could isolate ourselves to the cloud layer. What this means is our customers are responsible for bringing their raw data into a data lake or an enterprise data warehouse, and we build intelligence on top of their cloud. If we go to a mid-market bank in the US, it's likely that we'll have to build integrations into core banking softwares, right? So we don't have to rely on our customers to do the export onto a cloud and those kind of things. We could just automatically ingest their data, make it available in one place, build the AI on top of that, and deliver personalized results back into the consumer app. So we might have to build a lot more integrations if we go to market with a mid-tier bank instead of one of the larger banks that already invest in personalization.
Yeah, it seems like the larger banks must already have massive investments already in the space, and that the community bank, the local community bank, they're probably pretty far removed from that so far. But it sounds like there's more effort to kind of integrate, and you have to get the data and that probably would require some friction. But it seems like I'm curious to hear where this shakes out with you guys and where you end up focusing. But if you think of the volume of mid market banks or smaller banks, it's just like it's an enormous market, right? And like the sheer volume of customers. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out with your what you decide to focus on.
It is a huge market, right? And even among the customers we've already worked with, we have worked with some of the largest banks in Brazil, banks that have a 500-person data team, right? So it's not like banks that invest in AI don't see a benefit of working with Hyperplane,
Yeah.
right? We see two kinds of use cases, right? The first kind of use case is banks that already have personalization and AI efforts. They see a benefit because we unlock sources of data they haven't used before. And banks that don't have an investment in AI, we help them to go from 0 to 1 and launch 10x more experiments than they could have done without Hyperplane as a platform. So both ends of the spectrum, we have a different value prop, but the same platform offering the solution.
So, we've recently launched a report that talks about the future of various segments in LATAM, including fintech and AI applications, make a good portion of it. How do you see the convergence of AI and finance evolving in both the short and the long term? And what are the traditional financial institutions and fintechs positioning themselves to leverage this convergence?
I read through the report. That was one of the most comprehensive outlooks of the space that I've read in a while. So kudos to the team for putting that together. Uh, so to talk about like where do I see the convergence between AI and finance, right? Like financial institutions, wave one, they primarily thought about capitalization, market segmentation, interest rates, and those kind of things, right? Wave two was the new bank era, where as the lending and the capital aspect became a commodity, digitization and technology first solutions to banking became the next frontier. Wave three is going to be AI co-pilots, right? Today, a lot of banks, personalization is mostly some kind of lazy analytics. And what I mean by that is there are clusters of users. For each cluster, they offer a solution, but it's not really personalization down to every single consumer, right? If you know something specific about consumer A, can you offer a new solution or a different solution than you would to another consumer, right? Irrespective of which cluster they belong to, right? So if you can design an AI co-pilot that not just recommends the right product, but also educates the consumer on what is like a lot of banks, they have 7 different credit products, whether it's personal loans or revolving credit or credit cards. Like what is the difference between all of these products from a consumer's perspective? Is one more expensive in certain kinds of situations? And eventually you have these co-pilots making decisions on behalf of the consumer to lead them towards their own financial goals, right? And each consumer can have a different financial goals, and you have these co-pilots acting on their behalf. But to get to that world where you can have co-pilots run financial institutions, you require a lot of predictive models. And when I say predictive models, you want models to recommend, uh, does a consumer need a loan? Are they going to go into overdraft? Do they have a large expense coming up? Are they headed towards financial freedom? Each one of these goals that a consumer needs to accomplish, can we build a predictive model for it? And can we reduce the cost of building such a predictive model? Right? And so today, Hyperplane, because of the platformization aspect of it, we can spin up a predictive model with a simple API call. Right? So data scientists can go from not having a model in production at all to having hundreds of models a month from now, right? And traditional banks already have the data moat. So if they invest in the right technology and they align their strategy towards having AI at the core of consumer banking, there is a lot they could build, and they could capture the a large share of the wallet. And consumers can start banking with one of these institutions as their primary financial institution. But then, if you think about where is the future for AI and finance, I think of AI mostly as a programming technique. So it's really up to the product builders on what they can build if AI is available as an API. We want to be those, we want to be the platform that powers those APIs. But there could be a lot of new novel consumer banking products that can come up if AI is built at the core of it.
Yeah, I think that one of the challenges you have is just education, right? How do you educate the, whoever's making the calling the shots, because if you're maybe some very sophisticated leaders inside banks are up to speed on this, but my guess is that most of them, kind of know that they need to be smart about it, but they're probably not super knowledgeable. How do you go about when you're selling a product that's like relatively novel to them, especially like in the mid market size, if you decide to go that route? And what is the educational path to kind of, get them up to speed so that you can accelerate the sales cycle?
This is a challenge, right? It's a very fine line between selling the vision, a 5-year vision, versus solving an immediate business case to the bank, right? So if we go to the bank and sell them on, hey, we can build AI co-pilots for you that will automate a lot of the consumer financial decisions and give a great experience to the consumers, many banks are not going to buy it today because they have much bigger fish to fry, right? But there are actual business metrics that we could be optimizing for and delivering on their top line and bottom line today by building predictive AI models, right? This could be increased growth, reducing churn, increasing the LTV of the customer base, reducing customer acquisition costs. These are metrics that leaders in banks understand much better than most of us, right? So if we can build towards that long-term vision, but in a stepwise fashion where they see results in the order of weeks to months, then you're aligning incentives. The bank gets to meet their goals, the leaders get to hit their targets, but they're also investing in AI in the right direction. That 2-3 years of this investments, they're going to be the best positioned banks in the market to have that AI co-pilot and run the automation on behalf of the consumers. So it's mostly about trading off short-term investments and long-term investments as we make these sales.
Yeah, and navigating internally how people, how they look internally, whether they're on top of it, whether they're kind of anticipating what's to come. No, just to transition here with the last kind of more fun, not that this isn't fun, this is very fun, but more kind of less serious topic. We're several weeks removed from the open AI saga. Just curious, what was your impression? What happened, man? What was that all about? Like, is there something behind the scenes that we don't know about? What's your hypothesis? Just to do a little fun end of the episode gossip here.
OpenAI, they are one of the most talented set of people working on some of the hardest problems. Uh, I would just think of this as a very, very small blip in history. That it's an unfortunate series of events that happened, but I'm just glad that we've moved past it and we're focused on building some of these really cool models that are coming out of OpenAI. So it was definitely just as big of a shock for me as the rest of the world. Thankfully for us, we didn't spend too much time that weekend
Yeah.
on Twitter.
Yeah, you could. It could have been an SVB time suck all weekend where you would consumed in your kind of activity would be updating Twitter to read
Yeah,
the
it
next
was
thing.
it was 2 and 2 for us. We skipped the SVB saga just in time, and we had a busy weekend with our customers, so we also
Good.
didn't get to spend too much time on Twitter that weekend.
Yeah. Well, that's much better, much healthier, and it's easy to get sucked into some of that stuff. But as a founder, you got to have your head down and be in execution mode. Well, it'll be fun to we'll have you back after crack the U.S. market, and then you can share with the audience kind of how a Silicon Valley company that goes to the Brazil market first, and then second chooses the U.S. market. How you go from Brazil to the U.S. Because I know there's a handful of startups that are in that path right now, and there's obviously a massive market to be unlocked. I think it's a very exciting space. Obviously, you said you didn't want to ride the kind of AI trend, but you are, and that's fine. That's good, and especially in the banking sector, which is just an incredible amount of money and inefficiency. So it'll be fun to see what you're able to accomplish with building Hyperplane.
The next 12 to 18 months are going to be super exciting for us. The US is a massive market. Our technology is sophisticated enough, and we've gained the maturity to enter the market. So we're all looking forward to the next 12 to 18 months.
All right, man. We'll keep an eye open for it. But great to connect here, and congrats on everything you've accomplished so far.
Thank you. It was so nice talking to you after such a long time.
Yeah. All right, man. Talk soon.